Welcome to Cashed Out, where we dive deep into some of the most notorious robberies of financial institutions in history. I'm your host, Michael Dwyer, and today we're diving deep into the brazen crime that took place in 1997, the Bank of America heist in Los Angeles, California. This robbery is packed with intrigue, cunning, and plots that seem straight out of Hollywood movies. To truly understand the audacity of the Bank of America heist, we need to set the stage. In 1997, Los Angeles was a bustling city, thriving with economic activity. The financial district was filled with skyscrapers, and Bank of America stood tall amongst them all. It was one of the leading financial industries in the country. In 1997, its assets were around $242 billion. While the city enjoyed its prosperity, it was also grappling with crime and gang activities. There were eyes on LA for multiple reasons, including the shooting of Notorious B.I.G., the murder of Ennis Cosby, and the controversy behind the 1997 Cal State Northridge Matadors football team. Included with those events is the Bank of America robbery in 1997. The city was filled with tension and desperation, and it would play a significant role in the planning and implementation of this heist. The masterminds of this operation were Larry Phillips Jr. and Emil Matasaraenu. See, Larry and Emil met about 8 years before the crime took place. They were bodybuilders, so of course they immediately gravitated towards each other. These two were huge. I mean, Larry weighed 230 pounds standing at 6 feet tall, and Emil was 270 pounds at 6 foot 3 inches. Emil, he was an electrical engineer and a failed businessman up to this point. He tried running a computer repair business, but there was no success in that. Larry, on the other hand, he was a repeat offender. Nothing physically harmful, just a bunch of shoplifting and some real estate scams. That was until July 20th, 1993. In July of 1993, Larry and Emil decided to rob an armored truck. Not only that, they robbed it while it was waiting outside of a bank. And they weren't caught for 10 weeks. Here's the thing though. They probably would have gotten away with it at that point. But here's why they didn't. When Emil and Larry got pulled over one day, Emil was driving and he lied to the officer about who owned the vehicle. Had he told the truth, he would have gotten off with a ticket. Instead, the officer had them exit the vehicle. He searched the vehicle and found radio scanners, smoke bombs, explosive devices, body armor, 2 semi-automatic rifles, 3 handguns, more than 1,600 rounds of 39mm rifle ammo, 1,200 rounds of 19mm Parabellum, .45 ACP handgun ammo, and 3 different California license plates. That's the end of our story, right? Wrong. See, both men were sentenced to around 100 days in jail and 3 years probation. Now, I know that robbing a bank is a federal crime, but I would have thought robbing the delivery truck that brings the bank its money would also be one. But either way, they took a plea deal so that it allowed them to cut down on their jail time. And it allowed them to get all of their supplies back except for the guns and the explosives. So what happens when you give two desperate men who have just gotten out of prison and have no money all the supplies to rob again? Well, that's simple. They rob again. In June of 1995, the two were back at it. Larry and Emil focused on robbing an armored car again, except this time, it was a Brinks truck. This one didn't have that same result as the first one. This one resulted in the death of a Brinks guard and the injury of another one. These two were finally successful, so they stopped, right? Wrong again. In May 1996, they moved on from robbing armored trucks to robbing banks. They robbed 2 Bank of America locations in Los Angeles, stealing nearly $1.5 million. Looking at that today, that would be the equivalent of stealing $3 million today. Because of these robberies, the duo was branded with their own name, the High Incident Bandits. Imagine what that did to their egos. They got their own criminal nicknames. This had inspired them to keep it going. And on February 28, 1997, they tried again. It took months of preparation. I mean, when I told you this was like a movie, it really was. They would spend hours doing recon of the Bank of America location, but not just that. They used the police scanners to track the response time of police as well. 8 minutes. That's all it took. They armed themselves with semi-automatic guns, illegally converted weapons, 2 rifles, 2 fully automatic guns. Larry had almost 40 pounds of protective equipment on him to protect himself from head to toe. Emil, he just preferred a protective vest. But they both had watches in their gloves to keep track of their time. 8 minutes. I told you, it's straight out of a movie. And once the job was done, well, they planned on destroying everything by setting a jam jar filled with gasoline on fire inside of a vehicle with all of the evidence. They planned it all. At least they thought so. Larry and Emil were nervous. This robbery was supposed to be $750,000. $750,000. So before they went in, they took a sedative called phenobarbital to help calm their nerves. Pulling up in a 4-door Chevy Celebrity, the 2 men stepped out in preparation for their heist. But what they didn't know was that as they were getting ready to go in, 2 LAPD officers riding by noticed them and immediately called for backup. Okay. Remember I told you this was like a movie? So they immediately forced the customer at the ATM into the building and onto the ground. As they stepped in, Larry screamed, "This is a holdup!" And then they both opened fire into the ceiling for warning shots. Emil shot the lock on the door to enter the teller area and forced the assistant manager to open up the vault. Unfortunately for them, the delivery schedule for the bank had recently changed. This meant that there was significantly less than what they expected in the building. Enraged, Emil shot a full magazine of bullets into the vault, damaging a portion of their heist. They proceeded to load up approximately $303,000, less than half of what they expected. On top of that, they accidentally set off 2 die packs, impacting what they were going to get anyway. But they escaped the building. Within steps of walking out of the building, they noticed LAPD. Larry immediately started firing. He ended up shooting 9 people, 6 police officers, and 3 civilians before they ran back into the bank. Emil then decided to leave out of the back exit. Larry went back out the front and proceeded to unload rounds towards the officers while Emil made his way to the car. At one point, officers were warning other officers not to approach as their weapons had no effect on the men's armor. The officers were using their standard 9mm handguns and were being unloaded on so much that they couldn't precisely aim. After 18 minutes, LAPD SWAT finally arrived, armed with AR-15s, body armor, and an armored truck. They used that armored truck to get injured victims away from the gunfire. The next part? Well, I'll spare you all the details as it gets a little gruesome. Emil was outside of the vehicle shooting at police. He was shot 4 times. His butt, his leg, his arm, and the 4th one grazed his right eye. This woke him up and he dropped the money and then he hopped in the car. Meanwhile, Larry had made his way to the trunk of the car to get a different gun. While shooting at police, he was shot in the shoulder and his gun was hit by those spare bullets that were flying around. After he emptied the clip, he grabbed another automatic gun out of the trunk. Larry ended up running down the street and hiding behind a semi, shooting at officers until his gun jammed. Emil drove to meet Larry, but an officer saw a chance to end the shootout and took his shot. He shot rounds into the car, forcing Emil to abandon Larry and drive away. Larry ended up dropping his gun, walking out with a handgun, and proceeded to shoot until officers shot him 12 times. While on the ground, he decided to shoot himself to death. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away, Emil could no longer drive the car. See, the officer had shot the tires, and so he could not go any further. He tried to steal another vehicle, but as that driver ran away, unbeknownst to Emil, that driver activated the vehicle's kill switch. After Emil moved all the guns and ammo from the old vehicle to the new vehicle, he realized he was stuck. SWAT had caught up to him, and after moving back to his original vehicle, Emil shot at SWAT for 2.5 minutes. Bullets bounced off of Emil's armor as officers tried to take him down. It wasn't until officers shot under the vehicle and struck his unprotected legs 29 times that Emil surrendered. Unfortunately for him, he was still considered dangerous, so paramedics were not immediately allowed on the scene. It took 70 minutes before they were cleared to go in, and this resulted in Emil's death. In total, 11 people were injured, and 2 suspects died on the scene in this hour-long shootout. Three years later, Emil's family sued 2 of the officers and the city, stating that the officer let him die at the scene by telling the ambulance to leave without administering treatment. So in that 70 minutes, they called for an ambulance. An ambulance showed up, but it was prior to them clearing the scene. So one of the officers told them to get out of there in fear of their safety. I'll spare you the time of looking all this up though. This case resulted in a mistrial and was eventually thrown out. The Bank of America heist of 1997 serves as a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong, even for those who believe that they have everything planned out. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Cashed Out. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends. Join us next week as we explore another gripping tale from the world of crime. Until then, stay safe and keep your eyes open.